They smiled for the cameras, every one of them, my children, my grandchildren, even those distant relatives who'd never once sat at my table. They called me visionary, icon, matriarch. The ballroom sparkled, the champagne flowed, and I was the centerpiece of a celebration built on my name. But what they didn't see, what no one saw, was the ink drying on papers that would strip me of everything. That gala wasn't a tribute. It was a burial. And I was the one being lowered into the grave, still smiling, still applauding them back. But I've lived through war, death, and famine. I've buried a husband and birthed a legacy. And if they think this is how my story ends, oh, my sweet darlings, they've never truly known who I am. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I am Elaine Fairbourne, 79 years of age, founder of Fairbourne Interiors, widow of Ronald Fairbourne, my darling Ronny, who died far too young. Mother of 3, grandmother of 8, a woman who rose from soot and hunger to build an empire dressed in velvet, marble, and gold. I remember hand-sewing my first curtains in a freezing flat with a baby on my hip. I remember reupholstering my neighbor's chaise for a tin of sugar. I remember my first boutique, for clients and a cracked window, and the day Buckingham Palace placed its first order. I remember everything, especially betrayal. Because memory, when you're old and underestimated, becomes your greatest weapon. They told me the gala was to honor my life's work. 50 years of Fairbourne Interiors. A legacy stitched with lace, carved from wood, gilded in sweat and sacrifice. The invitations had gone out months in advance. Every socialite from London to Monaco was coming. A tribute, they called it. A celebration. They dressed me in silver silk. Alina, my eldest daughter, insisted. "Mum, it matches the chandelier. You'll look divine." She adjusted my earrings like a handler prepping a prize horse. My granddaughter Lottie helped with my shoes, too high for my bones, but fashionable. "You'll be the star tonight, Gran," she chirped. Her smile was tight, not nervous, calculated. As they wheeled me into the ballroom, the applause hit me like a wave. Flashbulbs, clinking glasses, roses strewn on the floor. The room was a stage. And I was the grand finale. I smiled. Of course I smiled. That's what matriarchs do. We shine. Even when we're being swallowed whole. My son Julian gave the first toast. "To the woman who built a kingdom with a needle and thread," he said, raising his glass. "To our mother. Our inspiration." There were cheers. Laughter. More photos. But my eyes drifted past him, to the balcony above, where 2 men in suits were signing papers. My papers. My lawyer wasn't here. My name wasn't on the podium backdrop. And when the speeches began to shift from Elaine Fairbourne to Fairbourne Future, I knew. They were handing it all over. To Alina. To Julian. To Grant, the youngest, my sweet boy who once painted butterflies on my workroom walls, now standing beside a brand consultant with glossy teeth. I leaned toward Lottie. "Where's Bernard?" I asked my accountant, my oldest friend. She blinked. "Didn't they tell you? He retired last week." "Retired? Bernard? Without a word to me?" I should have known then. I should have stood up, flipped that long mahogany table, and screamed. But I waited, because part of me, some foolish, desperate part, wanted to believe this was still a tribute, not a coup. That illusion shattered an hour later when they brought out the video. A documentary montage. Fairbourne then. Fairbourne now. Fairbourne next. My voice narrated the beginning, old footage of me cutting ribbons, hugging clients, crying beside Ronny at our first £1 million contract. But then my face vanished. The second half was all Alina's polished smile, Julian's tech initiatives, Grant's youth-targeted designs. And then came the final blow. A staged interview, filmed without my knowledge. I saw myself on screen, sitting in my conservatory, answering questions I thought were for a documentary. Innocent questions. Questions about legacy, age, and the future. They had edited it masterfully. I think it may be time to let go, my on-screen self said, cut and clipped like a puppet. The crowd applauded, as I sat there, silenced by my own manipulated words. Then the lights came up. Julian stepped to the microphone again. And now, with our mother's blessing, we present the new leadership of Fairbourne Interiors. They stood side by side, my 3 children, accepting ovations, blowing kisses. And I was still at the table, alone, forgotten. There was no thanks, no final toast to me, no flowers brought to my side. And when I tried to stand, the hem of my gown caught the chair leg, and I stumbled. The silence that followed was deafening. A few gasps, one laugh sharp, unmistakable. I'll never forget the sound. Alina didn't move. Julian looked away. Gran smiled apologetically, but said nothing. It was Lottie, sweet, strange Lottie, who finally helped me up. But even she avoided eye contact, as though my shame were contagious. They left me in that ballroom. I wasn't even wheeled out. I walked, slow, alone. Applause ringing in my ears like thunder over a battlefield. The driver was new. He didn't speak. He didn't open the door for me. When I reached the house, my key no longer worked. I stood on the steps of Fairbourne Manor, my manor, while the lights inside blinked off, one by one. That night, I didn't cry. I lit a fire, poured myself a scotch, and sat beneath the portrait of Ronny and me, the only one they hadn't had time to take down. They've declared war, Ron, I whispered. And they think I've already lost. But they've underestimated me. The thing about legacy? It's not built in boardrooms. It's built in blood. And I have just begun to bleed. The morning after the gala, I sat on the back steps of what used to be my home. The scotch from the night before still burned in my chest, and the weight of the evening clung to my shoulders like frost. The key, my own key, lay useless in my palm. They'd changed the locks, without telling me, without even pretending to soften the blow. A maid I didn't recognize opened the door with a cautious expression. I'm sorry, Mrs. Fairbourne. Mr. Julian said the house was being restructured. I was told not to let anyone in. Anyone. I wasn't Mother or Elaine. I was anyone. I turned away before she could finish. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me beg to enter my own estate. Instead, I walked, slowly, quietly, through streets that once bore my name in admiration. Strangers still smiled at me. People outside my gates didn't know what had happened. They saw a proud older woman in tailored gray, not the dethroned queen of a crumbling empire. But I knew. I didn't return to the hotel Alina had booked for me. No. I went to the one place none of them would think to look, my old workroom. A dusty studio tucked behind the original Fairbourne Interiors flagship, now converted into an exclusive showroom. They'd forgotten it existed. But I hadn't. I still had the key. A skeleton key Ronny made for me the year we opened it. Gold, warm, worn smooth from decades on my chain. The space was dark, cluttered with cloth bolts and antique tools. It smelled of lavender sachets and old wood. I sank into the armchair near the window and closed my eyes. The silence was rich, familiar. For the first time in days, I felt like myself. But peace was short-lived. By midday, the headlines had arrived. Fairbourne Interiors transitions to next generation. Elaine Fairbourne bows out at gala ceremony, out with the old. Luxury brand enters new era, out with the old. I scrolled through social media posts on my cracked phone screen. Photos of my children smiling, posing beneath banners. My face barely visible, faded, distant, irrelevant. There was even a video clip. The stumble. The audience reaction. The laughter. Someone had posted it with the caption, "When you overstay your legacy." I closed the app. I wanted to scream, to march back to the mansion and demand answers. But instead, I turned to the desk, opened the drawer, pulled out the oldest thing I still had, my ledger. I flipped through pages of names. Old clients, friends, loyalists, people who knew who I really was. One name caught my eye, Camille Rothwell. Camille had started as an intern. Timid, talented, ruthless in the best way. I mentored her, protected her. She owed me nothing, but she'd never turned her back on me, even when the board started shifting. She had left Fairbourne Interiors 3 years ago to start her own boutique firm. Quiet, discreet, successful. I found her number. My hands shook as I dialed. She answered on the second ring. Camille Rothwell. Camille, it's Elaine. A pause, a breath. Then, softly, Elaine. I was wondering when I'd hear from you. We met that evening in a little brasserie far from the city center. She ordered tea. I ordered coffee. We spoke in code. I didn't cry. They stripped everything I told her. I know, she said. I warned Julian 2 years ago not to push you out this way. He laughed. Called you. Obsolete. Obsolete. Camille leaned in. You want it back. I said nothing. You're not the first matriarch they've tried to erase, Elaine. But you may be the last they ever underestimate. She pulled out a folder. You remember Eleanor Bray? Of course I did. Eleanor had sold her antique design house to Fairbourne Interiors 8 years ago. A quiet acquisition. She disappeared afterward. Word was she was forced out, sent to a villa in Florence, silenced. Camille opened the folder. Inside were copies of internal emails, black and white transfers, bank statements. Names I recognized. Numbers that didn't add up. They've buried enough ghosts in this company to raise a cemetery, Camille said. And you were the final stone they needed to lay. I stared at the evidence. My children. My own flesh and blood. They hadn't just stolen the company. They had stolen other women's names. Signatures. Intellectual property. Eleanor's designs. Naomi Kahn's prototypes. Even some of my own early sketches, rebranded as Next Gen Fairbourne. They'd built their new era on theft. My humiliation wasn't an ending. It was a distraction. Camille, I said slowly, can you help me build something? She raised an eyebrow. Like what? A reckoning. I hadn't spoken to my children in 3 days. Not a single call. Not a single message. The silence wasn't accidental, it was a declaration. A mother erased, a founder buried. But while they thought I'd retreat into some seaside nursing villa and disappear into polite insignificance, I was gathering the very things they thought were ashes, my history, my allies, and my fury. Camille was efficient. Ruthless in a way I never had the nerve to be when I was younger. In 24 hours, she'd pulled together a team, an accountant, a lawyer, a digital archivist. They met with me in the back of a flower shop she co-owned with her wife, under the pretense of wedding planning. We sat around a small wooden table, surrounded by peonies and orchids. Let's begin, I said, placing a thick leather-bound journal on the table. What is this? The archivist asked. My original design ledger. From 1972 to 1990. Every piece I ever made. Signed. Sketched. Logged. Some of them they've rebranded. Others they've claimed under Julian's New Era label. And this, I tapped the page, is where we begin to peel the facade. Camille smiled like a lioness. You're going to bury them in their own architecture. But I didn't want revenge. Not in the way they imagined it. Not just lawsuits or board battles or scandalous headlines. I wanted the truth. Loud, undeniable, public. I wanted them to feel what I felt at that gala. Small, humiliated, erased. And I had just the plan. It began with Eleanor Bray. She was living in a quiet cottage in Sussex, tending a vineyard with her sister. I visited her alone. No entourage. No press. Just me and the scars we both carried. She didn't recognize me at first, my face older, thinner, no longer broadcasted on interior design covers. But when I said, they did it to you, too, her eyes welled. Over wine and wind, we swapped stories. Designs stolen, bank accounts frozen, silence purchased. I was ashamed, she whispered. Thought I was the only one. No, darling, I told her. You were just the first. I asked for her help, not in court, not in scandal, but in spirit. I want to create something, I said. A collection. Our real designs. Our signatures. Not for profit, not for revenge, but for truth. She didn't hesitate. I still have all my journals, she said. And I know 5 other women with the same story. By week's end, we had 7 names. 7 original designers erased by the Fairbourne expansion. 7 women with proof. We called ourselves the Founders Fire. Camille launched the website under a private server. Anonymous. Elegant. Nothing flashy. Just images, dates, sketches, signed designs, and comparison slides of Fairbourne Interiors' new catalog, matching ours detail for detail. We didn't name names. We didn't need to. The designs spoke for themselves. We gave the story to one journalist. Just one. A woman named Farah Devlin, a former design writer who had once been laid off after investigating intellectual theft. She published it on her independent blog. The story exploded in 48 hours. The women they erased, unmasking the real founders behind Fairbourne's new empire. It wasn't just a scandal. It was a movement. I watched from the flower shop as news crews gathered outside Fairbourne HQ. Julian dodged cameras. Alina issued a no comment. Grant, poor Grant, looked like a deer cornered by headlights and betrayal. And yet, still, none of them called me. Not to apologize. Not to explain. Not even to threaten. Because they still believed I was too old, too irrelevant, too finished to matter. So I made sure they saw me. The following week, the Founders Fire hosted a private exhibition, Legacy, Not Lies, inside an abandoned textile mill I once used to store fabric bolts. We restored it, painted it, lit it, filled it with our work. I walked the floor with Eleanor and Camille, and when the press arrived, we let them in. I stood at the center of the room, wearing the same silver gown I'd worn at the gala, the one they tried to make my funeral shroud. I am not obsolete, I said into the cameras. I am the foundation. And foundations don't crumble. They watch as towers fall. That clip made national news. The public turned quickly. Clients began pulling contracts from Fairbourne Interiors. Shares dropped. Lawsuits whispered through the wind like storm warnings. Still, my children said nothing. Not until the day they finally came to find me. It was a Thursday afternoon. Gray sky, damp air. I was arranging tulips in the shop when the bell rang. All 3 of them stood there. Julian, Alina, Grant. Alina looked thinner, almost pale. Julian's posture was stiff, formal. Grant wouldn't meet my eyes. I wiped my hands on my apron. I see the dead can walk after all. Julian cleared his throat. Mother, may we speak privately? I stared at them a long moment, then nodded toward the back room. They filed in, silent. I didn't offer them tea. Julian began. We didn't know what was happening with the other designers. That was all under our acquisitions team. You did know, I said flatly. You just didn't care. Alina stepped forward. We never wanted to hurt you, Mom. We thought you needed rest. Time away. You've been forgetting things lately, I laughed. Loud. Bitter. You manipulated a video to make me look senile. You changed the locks on my house. You left me on the ballroom floor like garbage. Don't speak to me of good intentions. Grant's voice cracked. I didn't want to. You were the last one I trusted, I whispered. And you let them throw me to the wolves. He dropped his gaze again. Julian stepped in. Mother, the board is preparing to remove us. Investors are fleeing. We wanted to ask if you'd consider helping us restore your image, to stabilize things. My hands curled into fists. Now you want my name. Now you remember who built your kingdom. Alina nodded. You're still the face. The legacy. We'll give you back the public platform. We'll reinstate you as Chair Emerita. Chair Emerita. A title with no power, no control. A decorative role for a woman they tried to destroy. I walked to the window and stared at the rain. You didn't just steal my company, I said. You stole my dignity. You humiliated me. And now you want me to fix the disaster you made. Julian stepped closer. We were wrong. But surely you don't want to see your own family ruined. I turned slowly. I want my legacy returned. Not just a name. In truth, I want a public confession. A formal press conference. You name every woman you erased. You restore every penny to them. You step down permanently. All three of you. They exchanged glances. That's not, it's that, or the fire keeps burning, I said. And I still have matches. They left without shaking my hand. I watched from the window as they stepped into the black car, all three of them soaked in silence. They didn't look back. And I knew, without needing to see inside that vehicle, that the unity they'd pretended to share was unraveling. Because their betrayal wasn't built on strategy or brilliance, it was built on shared greed. And greed, as I've learned over the years, makes for fickle alliances. I waited only a week for their answer. I didn't reach out. I didn't follow up. I simply returned to the workroom, to Camille, to Eleanor, to my ledger. We were already preparing Phase 2 of the Founders' Fire, a global licensing coalition for independent women designers whose work had been stolen or buried by larger firms. I didn't need Fairbourne Interiors anymore, but they needed me. And finally, they realized it. On a Friday morning, a courier arrived at the flower shop. No envelope, no signature, just a single flash drive in a black box and a printed note. We'll do the press conference. Everything you asked. Please save what's left of our family. My hands didn't tremble. Not anymore. I'd already buried the idea of family when they stood in front of hundreds and watched me fall. I played the flash drive alone in my workroom. It was the rehearsal, a private recording of what would be aired publicly the next day. Julian sat in front of the camera, hair neatly parted, suit charcoal gray. Alina wore a navy blouse and pearl earrings that used to be mine. Gran sat stiffly beside them both, like a child in detention. Julian began. We, the current board members of Fairbourne Interiors, acknowledge and accept full responsibility for actions that have misrepresented the legacy of this company. They went on, naming the women. Each one. Eleanor Bray, Naomi Kahn, Vera DuPont, Maria Shin. My name came last. And most egregiously, our mother, Elaine Fairbourne, whose original vision and decades of work were not only ignored, but undermined during our recent transition. We deeply regret our choices and seek to make amends, beginning with our immediate resignations from the board. They finished in silence. Not a tear. Not even false humility. But that was fine. I didn't want their tears. I wanted their admission. The press conference aired the next evening. Live. Broadcast across every major design and business network. I didn't attend. Instead, I hosted a private screening at the exhibition space with Eleanor, Camille, and the others. There were no cheers. No wine. Just quiet, collective justice. When my children's faces flickered on the large white wall, no one spoke. And when they said my name, no one applauded. Because this wasn't a victory. It was restoration. And it came far too late. Later that week, Grant visited me again. Alone this time. He looked different, unshaven, exhausted, eyes red. I know you'll never forgive me, he said quietly. I nodded. I won't. He handed me a folder. It's the deed to the cottage. The one in Renford Hill, Dad's favorite place. I had it transferred into your name. Quietly. No press. No spin. I took it, wordless. He stood for a while, awkward, boyish again. They're calling me a traitor for going along with your plan. Julian and Alina won't speak to me. You betrayed someone before them, I said, locking eyes with him. You'll have to carry both. He nodded once, then left. And for the first time in months, I cried. Not out of sadness. Not out of relief. But out of pure, white-hot grief for the family I had believed in. The family I raised. The family that stood over my downfall and clapped. It has been 6 months now. The Founders Fire is a thriving platform, and our licensing program has given a voice to over 50 women so far. Our stories are being taught in design schools. We're speaking at conferences, not as nostalgics, but as authorities. And me? I live in the Renford Hill cottage now. It's quiet, full of wildflowers and birdsong. Sometimes I hear the echoes of my old life, the speeches, the betrayals, the applause. But mostly I hear peace. I kept only one thing from Fairbourne Manor, the original sign. Hand-painted, slightly chipped, mounted on a board Ronny carved himself. Fairbourne Interiors, EST 1970, when it hangs above my fireplace. A reminder that they didn't erase me. They just reminded me what I was truly capable of when I stood alone. They still try to write me out. Even now, after the confessions, after the resignations, after their little empire began to fracture, they spin new versions of the story. Trade publications now refer to me as a symbol of resilience, as though I'm nothing more than an old tree that weathered a storm. They praise my graceful exit, when what I gave them was a fire they barely escaped with their name intact. They still don't see me. But that's fine. I'm not done yet. Camille came to visit the cottage last Thursday, bringing lemon tarts and a stack of letters from women who'd read about the Founders Fire. Some of them were designers. Others were artists, craftswomen, entrepreneurs, each with stories of being erased, underpaid, ignored. I read them by the firelight, my fingers brushing their ink like it was scripture. One letter stood out, a woman named Agnes Lim, from Singapore. She had worked under Fairbourne's international licensing division for 7 years. Most of her designs, she claimed, were resold under Grant's new line, Essence. She had proof. Dates, sketches, fabric codes. Every inch of her legacy had been whitewashed into something marketable. I stared at the page for a long time. Grant had given me the cottage, but he hadn't confessed everything. That weekend, I asked Camille to help me dig deeper. We pulled files, contacted former interns, anonymous whistleblowers, and board assistants who'd fled the company during its rapid expansion. What we found was worse than I expected. There were shell contracts, offshore copyright transfers, design laundering, and in the center of it, Grant. Sweet, soft-voiced Grant, who'd cried during school plays and once collected leaves for me to press into my journals. My golden child. My final thread of hope. And now, the final knife in my back. He'd been the one pushing Fairbourne Interiors into international markets. Julian and Alina had been distracted with domestic power struggles, but Grant had created his own empire beneath their radar. With my name still embossed in gold on every one of his product lines, I didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, I attended the Fairbourne Interiors liquidation auction. Quietly. Disguised. It was held in one of their flagship stores, soon to be sold to a tech startup. The space was sterile now. The marble floors were cold. My designs were on display like artifacts in a museum curated by people who never knew their meaning. The gilded mirror I made for our first royal client. The antique fainting couch I reupholstered during my pregnancy with Julian. The original conference table Ronny built with his own hands, where we signed every major deal. Now tagged, barcode, stripped of memory. I wandered through the rooms unnoticed, listening to the murmurs of collectors, decorators, opportunists. They say the founder's children ran the whole thing into the ground. She was old, wasn't she? Out of touch. No wonder the new generation wanted her out. Probably clinging to the past. I could have screamed. Instead, I bought the mirror. And the table. Paid full price even though they were mine. Because I wanted to carry them home myself. Because sometimes you have to reclaim what was stolen, not through war, but through witness. 2 weeks later, Grant arrived uninvited. He knocked once, then let himself in, holding a bouquet of tulips. My favorite. I didn't take them. You should have told me, I said before he spoke. He set the flowers down, ashamed. I didn't mean for it to go that far. You used my name, Grant. You used my legacy while pretending to be the innocent one. I was trying to keep us afloat, he said. After the board fallout. After the investors vanished. I thought if I could generate enough international capital, I could buy back some of the lost shares. Fix what Julian and Alina? I raised my hand. No. You don't get to shift the blame. You all gutted me in your own ways. You held the knife with different hands. He looked down. I gave you the cottage, he said. I tried to make peace. No, I said. You tried to buy silence. His face tightened. So what now? You want to ruin me too? No, I said. You've done that yourself. I want to restore Agnes Lim. I want every cent her designs earned. I want her name on every product line you stole. I want her future back. And if I don't? I stood tall, my voice steady. Then I go public again. And this time, I won't be gentle. He stared at me. That wounded little boy I used to tuck in at night was gone, replaced by a man who had forgotten who built the ground he stood on. But beneath the anger, I saw something else now. Fear. Because this time, he knew I wasn't bluffing. A month later, Agnes Lim received a formal settlement. Her designs were restored, her contract made public, and her story featured in Architectural Digest's Forgotten Creators issue. Grant stepped down from the licensing board, issuing a carefully worded apology. The media mostly moved on. But I didn't, because for the first time in decades, I wasn't being remembered, I was being seen. Not as a relic. Not as a myth. As a woman who had survived betrayal, fire, and the slow erosion of legacy, and still stood taller than ever. Camille asked me that night if I was finally at peace. I poured 2 cups of tea and answered honestly. No, I said. But I'm close. She smiled. What's next? I looked out the window toward the hills where the sun was setting across the field of wildflowers Ronny and I once walked. Now, I said, we plant something new. I spent the spring preparing the field. It started with a handful of daffodils, then rows of lavender, then deeper trenches for hydrangeas, roses, tulips. Camille joked that I was planting revenge in bloom. But it wasn't about vengeance, not anymore. It was about taking back time. For years, I had measured life in blueprints and ledgers. Now I measured it in root depth and blossom cycles. I moved slowly, one hand on my cane, the other in the soil. No staff, no servants. Just me and the earth that had never lied to me. Every plant held a memory. Lavender for Ronny. Roses for the company's first major contract. White tulips for the day Lottie was born. Hydrangeas for the friends I'd lost along the way. I called it the garden of what remains. The press tried to reach me throughout the summer. They wanted more stories, more scandal, more quotes from the woman who burned her dynasty to the ground. I ignored them all. Let them chase ghosts. I wasn't building an empire anymore. I was building peace. Camille visited often. She brought updates, new names joining the founders' fire, invitations to speak, legal wins against corporations that had long evaded accountability. You're starting something, she said one morning as we pruned the wisteria. Something bigger than legacy. I'm just planting flowers, I replied, though I knew what she meant. Our story, mine, Eleanor's, Naomi's, all of us, had become a ripple, a shifting of the tide. But even as the world turned its attention forward, there was still one chapter left behind me, unfinished. Alina. I hadn't heard from her since the press conference. She had vanished into quiet disgrace, taking a leave from public life, declining interviews, avoiding all confrontation. Even Julian, who now lived in Switzerland, had tried to reach out once or twice, his emails bland, his apologies thin. But Alina was different. She wasn't just my daughter. She was my mirror. Cold where I was warm. Calculated where I was impulsive. Brilliant and brutal in equal measure. I had poured myself into her as a child, taught her how to stitch, how to lead, how to see the world not for what it offered, but for what it concealed. She had inherited my ambition, and somewhere along the way, she twisted it into entitlement. But even after all she'd done, even after the edited interview, the gala, the ballroom floor, I felt something unfinished between us. A thread left uncut. So when I received the anonymous envelope, I knew it was her. No return address. Just a folded note inside. If you'll see me, come to the terrace at St. Hilda's Chapel. No press. No lies. I sat with it for 3 days before I answered. Then I went. St. Hilda's sat on a cliff's edge, overlooking a wind-lashed sea. The chapel was closed for renovation, but the terrace remained open. Ivy twisted along its stone walls, and the sky above was smeared in gray like a half-finished canvas. She was already there. Alina. Her hair tied back, a scarf wrapped around her neck. She didn't look like a disgraced executive or a public villain. She looked like my daughter. The little girl who used to sneak into my workshop to steal swatches of velvet and lace. Mother, she said quietly. Alina. A pause. I suppose I should start with an apology, she said. No, I said, you should start with the truth. She exhaled, slow and sharp. We didn't mean for it to happen that way. The gala. It was supposed to be a soft transition. A celebration. Julian pushed for the press. Grant wanted a rebrand. I let it happen because I thought you wouldn't step down unless we forced your hand. And why would I have to step down, Alina? I asked. Because you wanted to be the queen? Her eyes flashed. Because you never stepped aside. Ever. Not when Dad died. Not when I came back from university. Not when I pitched you new ideas. Not when I warned you the industry was changing. You built a throne and refused to leave it. I said nothing. She turned away, staring over the cliffs. I was drowning in your shadow, she whispered. Every room I walked into, I was Elaine's daughter. Every deal I made, every client I pitched, they compared me to you. I could never be enough. I moved closer. And so you thought destroying me would make you seen. Tears welled in her eyes. I didn't want to destroy you. I wanted to be you. My chest ached, not from anger, from memory, from the realization that I had raised her to reach the sky and then became the ceiling that blocked her path. I taught you to fight, I said, but I never taught you how to forgive. She turned back, her voice breaking. Will you ever forgive me? I walked past her, toward the edge of the terrace. The wind curled around my ankles like a forgotten child. I forgave you, I said, the moment I saw myself in your mistakes. She stepped beside me. Then why did you let it go this far? Because sometimes, I said, the only way to teach your children the cost of power is to let them lose it. We stood there in silence, side by side, the sea roaring beneath us. She reached into her coat and pulled out a folded paper. This is what's left of my shares. I want you to use them. For the garden. For the foundation. For whatever future comes next. I took it, not because I needed it. Because she needed me to. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. We didn't pretend we were whole again. But we walked down the chapel steps together. And sometimes, that's enough. I sat alone in the garden that night, beneath the arbor where Ronny once hung wind chimes carved with our initials. The moonlight spilled across the tulips like spilled milk, and somewhere deep in the hedges, an owl called out a lonely, haunting sound. I'd been thinking of chairs lately. Not thrones. Not board seats, just chairs. Because for decades, I'd built them. Sleek ones, ornate ones, chairs with ivory inlays and carved armrests, chairs for royalty, for tycoons, for broken-hearted brides sitting at vanities. And I had always designed them with one goal in mind: comfort, support, endurance. But in all that time, I had never designed a chair for myself. I was always standing, moving, arranging others. There had never been a place for me to rest, to reflect, to simply be. Until now. And so, that summer, I began to build one. Camille laughed when she found me sanding wood behind the cottage. Elaine, she said, you have 10 master carpenters at your call. I don't want hands, I replied. I want this one to come from mine. It took me weeks. My fingers, arthritic and trembling, weren't what they once were. But muscle memory is a stubborn thing. And grief gives you strength even youth can't replicate. The chair was simple, sturdy, made of cherry wood and oak. No gold, no flourish. just elegance in structure, in balance. A chair meant not for guests or galleries, but for the woman who had always stood behind everyone else's success. When I finished it, I placed it at the edge of the garden and left the space beside it empty. Not for Ronny, not for any of my children, but for the past, because while I'd learned to forgive, I hadn't forgotten. And I didn't want to. That same week, Lottie came to visit. She was no longer the wide-eyed girl helping me into heels. She had grown sharper, more silent, her once effervescent energy replaced by something still and deep. I dropped out of the design program, she said without preamble. I turned to look at her. Why? Because it wasn't about creating anymore, she said. It was about climbing, stealing, performing. You could have stayed and changed that, I said. She shook her head. I needed to step back to remember why I ever wanted to design in the first place. And I remembered something you once told me, that the most beautiful rooms aren't the ones that dazzle, they're the ones that feel like truth. I smiled. Then she handed me a sketchbook. Inside were designs raw, unpolished, full of emotion. Chairs, tables, garden benches, all imperfect, all human. I want to learn, she said. The way you learned. From the ground up. My throat caught. I nodded once, then again. And finally, I opened the second workbench. For the first time in years, I took on an apprentice. The garden became more than a sanctuary. It became a classroom, a meeting place, a quiet revolution. Designers came and went. Young, old, forgotten, up and coming. They brought sketches, stories, wounds. We sat in circles, no hierarchy, no titles. No one asked about my children, about the fall of Fairbourne Interiors. Because in that garden, power didn't matter. Truth did. One morning, 6 months after the gala, I received a letter. Handwritten, no signature, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. Julian. He wrote only 3 lines. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope one day you'll let me build something with my hands too. Not to reclaim what I lost, but to understand what you gave. I set the letter beside my tea. For a long time, I said nothing. Then I walked to the bench at the edge of the garden, and I placed another chair beside mine, unfinished. Rough wood, no polish. A chair waiting for hands to shape it. Maybe one day Julian would arrive. Or maybe it would remain empty. Either way, it would be there. Not as a gesture of peace, but as a testament to growth. The world no longer asks for interviews. The headlines have faded. Fairbourne Interiors is being quietly dismantled, its name fading from billboards and trade journals. But the founder's fire burns brighter than ever. We've partnered with global museums to archive women's design history. We've funded scholarships, opened a training center, and hosted exhibitions titled not after brands, but after the names of the women themselves. My name is no longer spoken in boardrooms, but it is whispered with reverence in workshops, gardens, and studios. And that's more than enough. Because I am Elaine Fairbourne, and I was never meant to be anyone's stepping stone. I was the foundation, the fire, and now I am the garden. 3 years have passed. The garden still blooms. Every season brings a new rhythm, spring's riot of color, summer's perfume, autumn's bronze sigh, and winter's skeletal honesty. I sit in my chair each morning, warm tea in hand, the early light catching on the carvings I etched into its arms. Hope on the left, memory on the right. Lottie runs the workshops now. She teaches the younger ones how to shape curves from stubborn wood, how to let their pain inform their design. She laughs with them. She listens. She knows when to guide and when to get out of the way. I watch her sometimes from the arbor and see flashes of the girl she once was, the one who helped me into my shoes before the night they tried to bury me. And sometimes I see someone better. Camille still visits every other week. We sip black coffee on the terrace and talk about the foundation's progress. The scholarship fund is now global. Design houses once dominated by men now feature exhibitions titled after women who were once forgotten. Agnes Lim, Eleanor Bray, Naomi Kahn. Names that were nearly erased. Names we carved back into history. As for my children, Julian never built the chair. He visited once, stood at the garden's edge, and watched the sun dip behind the treetops. We didn't speak. He didn't walk through the gate. He left a letter in the mailbox with a single line. I see it now. You were never trying to stay in power. You were trying to keep us from becoming what we did. Alina never returned. But last winter, I received a package. No return address. Inside, one of my earliest sketches framed. It was the design I drew the week she was born, a bassinet with curved walnut spindles and mother-of-pearl inlay. She'd kept it all this time. There was no note. There didn't need to be. Grant now lives in New Zealand. He's part of a local woodworking collective. Occasionally, photos arrive, pieces he's made with his own hands. Nothing commercial, just truth in timber. One of his pieces, an ashwood bench with wild edges and imperfections, now sits beneath the sycamore tree near the pond. He didn't ask permission. He didn't have to. The press has forgotten me. The world has moved on. And still, every week, strangers come to the garden. Designers, dreamers, survivors. They sit, they sketch, they cry, they begin again. They ask me questions sometimes. Do you miss the old company? Do you regret what happened with your children? Was it worth it? I always answer the same. Would you have heard my story if they hadn't tried to silence me? Because in the end, it wasn't the betrayal that defined me. It was my refusal to disappear. The chair beside me is still there, unfinished, empty, but it no longer feels like absence. It feels like possibility, because maybe someone else will sit there one day, someone who needs to rest, someone who lost everything and is still standing. Someone who's ready to remember that even in ruin, you can build again. And when they ask me who I am, I'll smile, extend my hand, and say, I am Elaine Fairbourne. And this is where the fire led me. Here the story ends. Thanks for watching. Hit like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more true and real stories.